Good morning. That's right. It's morning, not afternoon, but we have this special edition of Trail Talk. We're very, very excited about today. Thank you so much for joining us. And you know what? If it's afternoon or night or whatever time of day you're watching this, we're just glad that you're going to be a part of this amazing interview. So, as you can see behind me, the screen says Bob Snead, Buffalo Soldiers Revisited. This is Bob Snead is our current featured artist in our Garis Gallery of the American West. And this is the name of the exhibit that is here. And I have some biographical information. If you follow our website, maybe you've seen this already, but I just want to share this about Mr. Snead. George Robert Bob Snead was known to many around the world as a modern day Renaissance man, war hero, accomplished artist, stage actor, entrepreneur, and noted historian. Bob Snead's credentials are numerous. His paintings hang in the Texas governor's mansion as well as around the world. He was appointed artist in residence for the University of Texas at El Paso African American Studies in 1998. The Errand of Corporal Ross, which is a piece we'll be talking about later, was selected as the model for the Buffalo Soldier Memorial erected in 1998 at Fort Bliss. Snead is an inductee into both the El Paso International Hall of Fame for Visual Arts and the El Paso Aviation Hall of Fame. He was recognized as the 2016 Trailblazer Award honoree for the National Alumni Association of West Charlotte High School. And that seems like maybe the very tip of the iceberg as far as information about Bob Snead, but we have a very special guest with us today, Karen Partee, who is Bob Snead's daughter, is with us to tell us more about her dad, who passed away in 2020. And I think that you will feel like I do. I feel like I missed a really big opportunity in my life by not ever having a chance to meet Mr. Snead in person. But I know that Karen is going to fill in and just really share a lot of great things about her dad. So Karen, welcome to Trail Talk.
Well, thank you, Edie. Appreciate being here. It's exciting to be here.
So your dad, I loved that he was called a modern day Renaissance man. Can you tell us a little bit about his beginnings? Because this picks up and says war hero, accomplished artist. These sound like his adult year accomplishment. How did he start off with these things?
Yes, we do call him a Renaissance man because I always say that my father probably lived about 3 or 4 lifetimes in his 84 years because he was an artist, an aviator, an actor, an entrepreneur, a historian. He did all of that in such a short amount of time, if you think about it. He actually started out as a self-taught artist and cartoonist at the age of 10 years old when he was in Charlotte, North Carolina, when he grew up. He didn't actually take his first art class, though, until he was in West Charlotte High School, and that was at the age of 17. He would go on later in life to actually study with some other noted artists, particularly some impressionists when he went overseas in the military, which, by the way, he joined the military at the age of 19. When he went in, and this is something we learned a little bit later on after he passed away and we started going through his paperwork. You know, my dad, when he talked about the military, he always talked about it in terms of him being an aviator. It was his most precious time of him being in the military. My father actually, though, went in as a sharpshooter. And so he did that for some time, was in infantry, and he's got a number of decorations from being in the military primarily. He has 41 air medals, again, from his time being an aviator. He has 3 Purple Hearts, but he has 2 Bronze Stars with V devices, and that means they were awarded for valor. And he received his first Bronze Star and first Purple Heart when he was in the Dominican Republic as a sharpshooter. And he saved his squadron during that time. So it's always fascinating just to learn a little bit more about my dad because, of course, I knew him as dad. I saw him a lot as an artist, knew, of course, that he was an aviator. He did still do that in my time when I was alive. But just hearing about his early work in the military as a sharpshooter was always very fascinating for me and my
Right.
brother.
So how long was he in the military?
He was in for 30 years. So he went in at
Wow.
19 and served 30 years. And then shortly through, I don't really know the time frame exactly of when he went to flight school, but I know my sister was really young, so she's the oldest. But my dad did serve 4 tours of duty in Vietnam. And
Wow.
so he spent a lot of time there. His last tour of duty was in 1971 when I was
Wow.
born. So.
So
Yeah,
you sent some pictures
I
from
did.
these military years. I think it'd be kind of a great time to look at some of those.
Absolutely. So my dad was a CW4, Chief Warrant Officer 4. Back in that time, there is a Chief Warrant Officer 5 now. But at his time, that would have been about the rank of a colonel. If you're talking Air Force. So my dad was a dual rated pilot, so he could do both helicopter and fixed wing. When I hear him talk about his stories, though, I think he really preferred helicopters. That's what he did when he was in Vietnam. He did both
Okay.
slicks and gunships. So he provided air cover for the troops. And then he was also, flew helicopters that would fly low to the ground to allow the troops off and get onto the ground. My dad was shot down 3 times, but never lost a man or a machine. So he's very proud of that distinction as well.
Wow. Your
Yeah.
dad, I mean, the word brave just keeps popping
Absolutely.
into my
It was
head.
incredible. Yeah,
My goodness.
he was a bit of a maverick though, as a when he was an aviator. He just loved flying. He loved the men that he served with. He was in the 170th helicopter squadron. You may not be familiar with it, but the military is certainly familiar with it because this is the squadron that actually wrote the Bible on dogfighting in helicopters. So
Oh,
attack helicopter. So he was an attack helicopter pilot. His call sign was Buccaneer 4.
okay. So, I guess this particular photograph, this is not a helicopter that's outfitted for that kind of
No. He
action.
flew Hueys when he was in Vietnam. So they're the larger helicopters that you would be familiar with seeing that would actually carry troops. So
With the
he flew
big
those.
open side doors and,
Absolutely. So he flew
okay.
those. And so he was responsible for, getting troops, but then also getting troops to the ground, but also providing that air cover to troops that were already on the ground.
Wow.
Yeah. So
Wow.
he did a lot. And we were, happy that when, my dad came back, he was able to talk about it. Some people who return from war do not want to share those stories. My dad was very open in talking about those stories. And certainly when he first arrived back, there's a lot that he talked through with my mother, but he was open to telling those stories. And so he really painted a kind of a rich history for me and my brother and sister about his time spent there. And so
Right.
this is where art comes into play. To relax, my dad would paint, he would draw. And that's how he would entertain himself and how he would deprogram, if you will, from, the things that he was seeing when he was on the battlefield, serving
Mhm.
with his men. So a lot of his, military friends have some of the paintings that he painted there, which leads
Okay.
into the Buffalo Soldiers because it was in the military that he first learned about the Buffalo Soldiers. He hadn't heard anything about them up until 1956 when he went to
Wow.
a movie. And there was a movie that featured the Buffalo Soldiers. And when he went back to his commanding officer the next day and said, tell me about these troops, he was they were like, you're going to have to find out, you're going to have to learn for yourself. And so that's exactly what my dad did. He spent the next 50 years of his life learning all that he could about the Buffalo Soldiers, traveling, all over the United States, meeting with other historians who knew pieces of their story, going to West Point, where some went through the academy there, officers who became, commanding officers of the Buffalo Soldiers went through the academy. And we lived in El Paso, Texas at the time where my dad did most of his research. And the Buffalo Soldiers were known to be in Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, and of course, Oklahoma.
Right. So let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
I recently found out that the military, they actually have artists who travel and sketch and paint things that happen when they're out, when they're deployed, or
Right.
when they are. Did your dad ever?
He did not do any of that. Anything that he documented of the time in the military was, just something that he did on his own. No, he didn't serve
Okay,
that role.
but that was not one of his roles.
No, that was not
Okay.
one of his roles. He was primarily, particularly in Vietnam, primarily an aviator at that point. First tour he went in as infantry, but when he came back, he did his flight school and went back. The final 3 tours, all as aviator.
Okay, but he was a cartoonist.
He was a cartoonist. Yes, and as I was telling you, he did become a cartoonist with the Army Times. And so in the mid 80s, my dad actually published a cartoon book of all of his aviation cartoons that he had done over the years. And that was called Hours and Hours of Boredom. And that's what he said aviation was. Hours and hours of boredom, punctuated by moments of stark terror.
Right, because he would just have to sit and wait until.
Wait, fly maneuvers, all of that. Yeah. But then when they got into the action, they really got into the action.
Wow. So then, would this be after he retired?
This is after he retired. This would be in the mid 80s, the time frame. So there were 3 distinct periods in which my dad painted the Buffalo Soldiers. So he started his first piece, and we'll be talking about this shortly. He painted in the late 50s, early 60s, his first piece, but he really got into where this became a collection, the 1970s. Then 1981, 82, and then 1985, 86. Between the 60s and the 70s, he was just painting. But it wasn't really a collection. He knew about the Buffalo Soldiers, so he was painting a piece here and there. But it wasn't until like the late 70s, early 80s that it became a collection. So this is one of actually the later pieces, and then and you can see some behind him. There's a total of 167 pieces in this exhibit. And I know you guys have about a handful of them. But it took him 50 years to do the entire exhibit, the last piece, which was done in 2010. But he started in 1958 time frame.
So this was his life's work. This was his opus.
Life's work. In addition to being an aviator, when he retired from the military, he became a master framer. So he had a custom framing shop. So, he's an artist, you need to be able to frame your own art. So he learned that craft and became a master framer. And then while he was in the military, he traveled with the USO. And so my dad was an actor too. He actually started acting when he was in high school, but he just kind of carried that with him. So he began studying a particular Buffalo Soldier named Henry Flipper, the first Black graduate of West Point Military Academy. And he did a one-man, one-act play about Flipper's life for about 25 years.
Oh my gosh, I would have loved to see that.
Yes. So he actually performed that all over the country, all over the world, if you will. But he did get to perform it at West Point Military Academy, where Flipper graduated as a first Black graduate and first officer in the military. And Henry Flipper's great nephew was attending the academy at that time. And got to see my dad do the play. So just a nice, turn, full circle moment.
Right. That is so we actually, here at the Heritage Center, we have an education program, and it kind of goes with the school year.
Right.
And we offer 4 different educational things. Anyway, the last one that we teach is about the land runs, the settling of Oklahoma, Indian territory to the state and all that. And we always have a little exhibit thing about Henry Flipper.
Wow.
That is always included in that session
when
we
that
teach
is incredible. Oh,
yes. So I was so excited to see the pieces that your dad had about Henry Flipper. I can't wait. I mean, those won't be here, but I know even more about Henry Flipper because of all the research your dad did.
If you can find it, in 1985, 86, my dad did a made-for-TV movie about Henry Flipper's life and the play for PBS. And it was called Held in Trust. It
was called, wait, say that again.
Held in Trust.
Held
in Trust. Held in Trust is the name of the play, The Life and Times of Henry O. Flipper. If you can find that, now it came out originally on VHS, but if you can find it in the archives of PBS, it did win a Golden Apple for excellence in education. But the intro is done by actor Ossie Davis, and my dad does the on-screen performance there, and it's done in narration and on-screen performances. But it was translating the play to TV. So it would be great if you could find a copy of that and put it in your exhibit there.
Oh my goodness, that would be amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I can't wait to look that one up.
Absolutely.
It's on one of eBay. There's a VHS. There is a VHS on eBay, believe it or not.
All right. You got to find it. Now you got to find a VCR.
Yeah. Maybe my husband, he's a little bit of a techno geek. Maybe he could help me out on that. Woo, that would be.
Or, maybe you can convert it to DVD. We'll see.
Yes, exactly. Oh my gosh. What fun. Yikes. Yeah. I'm so excited. Okay. So
you see the first
the
piece
Buffalo Soldier.
Yeah, so this is the first piece behind you. So giving you, we know a little bit of history about the Buffalo Soldiers. They are the all-Black military regiments of the U.S. Army. They were formed a year after the Civil War in 1866 in Fort Sill, Oklahoma, if you guys did not know that connection. There were actually 6 regiments of all-Black troops. 4 of them, though, were infantry. The 2 that my father studied were cavalry. That's the 9th and 10th Cavalry Regiments. And so they get the name Buffalo Soldiers from their adversary, Indians, who likened the short black curly hair of the Black soldiers to that of the buffalo. Certainly something that they revered in their time in history too. And that's why the Buffalo Soldiers took that name on with pride. And that's why the buffalo image is on the regimental crest for those cavalry troops. So when you see that crest, you know why the buffalo placement there. So they took it on as a badge of honor to carry that name because they certainly felt the Indians were a worthy adversary. So this piece here, going back to my dad's time in Vietnam, he had already been for about 10 years studying the Buffalo Soldiers. And of course, he just starts painting as a way to relax. And he paints the Buffalo Soldier. This piece was done in 1968. And so it's the very first in the collection. He painted it in Vietnam. So this painting has traveled the world. The painting that you have on display is the original, and it's the only painting, one of the few paintings it's never been reproduced. Of his most popular paintings, he's never made an adjustment to it in any way, shape, or form. He's made prints of it, but we don't have any more prints available. So that piece is pretty signature in that respect. It is one of the more striking pieces in the exhibit for the strength and vulnerability that you see in the soldier's face. The painting made its debut in an exhibit in 1981 when my dad was stationed in Vicenza, Italy for his last tour of duty. And when I say it made its debut, it actually was in some other exhibits in North Carolina in the 70s. But it made its debut as part of what he was now calling the Buffalo Soldier Collection. So that was the first time it was seen as part of a collection, if you will, in Vicenza, Italy. There are two questions that are always asked about this painting. The first one is it a self-portrait of my dad? And it is not. It is not actually a picture of any known real life person. What it was is what my dad imagined a young soldier to look like during that time period. So you can see here, this Buffalo Soldier is representing the 9th Cavalry. It's not modeled after anybody, just from my dad's imagination. The second question is, who is he looking at? Because it's obvious he's looking at over his shoulder very pensively. And he is looking at someone. And if you'll go to the next slide, I'll tell you who's looking at. He's looking at his greatest enemy that they fought the most, and that would be the Indians. And there are a number of Indians tribes that the Buffalo Soldiers encountered during their time. So they were in Buffalo Soldiers were in Texas, they were in Oklahoma, Arizona, and New Mexico. So they confronted the Kiowa, the Comanche, the Sioux, the Cheyenne, and of course, the Apache, which is the name of this piece here. You could tell what tribe an Apache Indian was in by the headband that they wore. So the Chiricahua that we're seeing here was the red headband. The Warm Springs wore no headband. And the Mescalero Apache wore white headbands. So the one that you see here, my dad has represented as the Chiricahua. There are descendants of Mescalero Apache still in New Mexico today. And if any of you have spent any time in New Mexico, up in the Ruidoso area, specifically the Inn of the Mountain Gods, run by the Mescalero Indians, they are descendants of those Apache tribes of the turn of the century here that Buffalo Soldiers did go head to head with. So you can see in the picture, it stands to reason, the Apache is looking at the Buffalo Soldier. So you can see the direction he is looking. So whenever my dad would do an exhibit, he always asked that these paintings, the two, Buffalo Soldier and Apache, be placed in close proximity, not necessarily always text together, but they had to be placed in close proximity so they are looking as if they are looking at each other, because that is actually how he painted them. So that is no coincidence in the way he did that.
So your dad knew that he was not just painting random pictures.
Yeah.
All of his pieces like this, he had this bigger plan.
Much bigger picture.
Creating.
Much bigger. I mean, he didn't go into it thinking that he was going to become a historian of their story. But the more he learned, and the fact that he didn't know, as someone in the military, and the things that they did just in the military, and the accomplishments that these troops had, he felt like he wanted more people to know this story. And that's why my dad was never really a fan of keeping his paintings. So he painted 167 of these pieces. He only had one at the time of his death. Either through he donated them to community centers, or he sold them to individuals because he wanted the story to be told. He did not want in a studio in his home and nobody is hearing their story. So yes, he became a historian out of this, and the pieces are all researched. And so there's a history behind every piece. And so while we're talking about 20-year time period between the time he painted Buffalo Soldier and Apache, he still knew that the two would need to be connected.
Right. What a gift. What a gift that is.
Yeah.
Especially, I'm just thinking to someone like me, I live right here in Oklahoma, where the Apache lived, where the Buffalo Soldiers lived and worked, where so much of this history took place. And just the work that your dad did and culminating all those things, it's a gift for
Yeah.
us, I believe.
Admittedly, when my dad is doing this as I'm growing up, I just look at my dad. Oh, he's the cartoonist, he's the artist. He helps my school projects look great.
Yeah.
I'm not really thinking about, the impact that he is having with his work and the things that he's bringing to light with this history. A lot of our family vacations were actually spent going to historical sites and looking at where the Buffalo Soldiers served. And you can imagine with three teenagers and preteens, we're like, oh, really? We have to look at another old building. We're not appreciating it. But now as adults and me and my brother and sister having our own children, we do see the impact of the work that my dad did in those 50 years putting this together.
Right.
Certainly.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So moving on to our third piece. This piece, the full title of it is 59th Minute of the Final Hour. And we all shorten it. Anybody knows my dad's work, we shorten it to the 59th minute. So this is a very interesting piece too. It was first painted in 1971. So it too made a debut in some early art exhibits in North Carolina for my dad, well ahead of the larger collection. So it's always just been a striking piece from just a military standpoint. But what's most interesting about it is this painting of all the collection is the painting that's been painted, not reproduced, but actually painted the most times by my father. So there's many different representations of this painting because we've had several people come up to us and say, oh, I have that as an original. And we're like, it can't be. And my dad would be like, oh yeah, because I painted for it then. So he kept reproducing this, repainting it, if you will. So he would start from scratch. Because the painting itself actually only started with the folded flag and the Purple Heart when he first painted it in 1971. So it just kind of represented the military. In 1981, when he wanted to bring it into the collection, he repainted it again, this time adding that the cavalry hat and then adding the Medal of Honor. And that is a 9th Cavalry hat that you see there. This was, of all the 167 pieces, my dad's favorite. So
really?
Yes. So he had the original, the one that you have in your gallery there is the one that my dad had at the time of his death that he had gifted to my mother. It is the only piece that he gifted to my mother, the only piece that he had in his possession at the time of his death. So it is his favorite piece.
The one that's here?
The one that's here. Yeah. Yes.
Wow.
Yes,
That's
absolutely.
so precious. I love that.
So yes, that's his piece there. Loved it. It's his favorite because he says it says so much without saying a word. And so it is a very striking piece as well. Sometimes these representations don't do it justice. So I do encourage anyone listening out there watching to get down to the gallery to see the vivid color of it up close because it is a gorgeous piece up close. And so this actually hung over my parents' mantle in their townhome, up until the time that my dad passed away. So he really loved this piece, and everyone who's ever seen it loves it too. But it's 59th minute of the final hour. So beautiful. My dad's favorite. This piece here is actually one of the most popular pieces, and for many people, particularly in Texas, most recognize my dad's work from this piece. This is called The Errand of Corporal Ross. And this is also one of these pieces that really demonstrates the history that in the research that my dad did before painting pieces. So this is of a real life event that actually happened and took place in 1878. That is Corporal John Ross on the horse there. He's in 9th Cavalry I Troop. And he was tasked with the errand of bringing up lagging wagon trains. So that was one of the jobs that the Buffalo Soldiers did during that time. Protecting pioneers who were making their transition west, protecting those who were putting telegraph lines, protecting settlers who decide to make their homes in the states of Oklahoma, New Mexico, Arizona, and Texas. And then of course they did battle with the Indians during that time. So we had some wagon trains who were lagging behind the other settlers there, and he was tasked with going and serving as protection to get them back with the group. On his way to get those wagon trains to Apache Indians, I believe they are Mescalero Indians, they come in hot pursuit of him. And he is armed only with a single shotgun. So he turns in his saddle to, make haste in disposing of those two Indians. And he does. He is successful in that, saving his own life so he could rendezvous with those wagon trains and complete his task for the day. And so this is called The Errand of Corporal Ross. Why it's become so popular is it was selected to serve as the model of the official Buffalo Soldier Monument at Fort Bliss in El Paso, Texas. So there was a statue created of Corporal Ross there on his horse. So the horse is in the statue as well. He is turned as he is in the painting here. And the dedication of that at the entrance of the gate to the military base was done in 2009. So my dad did get to do that. But the painting was actually painted in May 1981, which is really interesting. This is the only painting in the collection that my dad actually dated it on the back. So we know the actual time frame in which he painted it in 81. It made its debut in that first exhibit at the Galleria d'Art David in Vicenza, Italy. My dad, when he was stationed in Italy in the early 80s, studied with Italian Impressionist Salviano Constantini, and this was his gallery. So when my dad finished studying with him, they had two exhibits there. This was in the 1981 exhibit. And so it debuted in October of that year. And so that was the first time that piece was seen. This was also made into a belt buckle that's been very popular with individuals who like to wear belt buckles. So this image and then the history of the painting and the incident are noted on, are engraved on the back of that belt buckle. So the original piece of this art is owned by Ginger and Rick Francis of El Paso, and Rick was the former mayor of El Paso. So they have the original of this piece.
So there are a lot of things about this. It is different from the other three pieces that we've looked at. And when you said he studied with an impressionist artist, you can see that influence.
Yes.
In this piece. And I also love the perspective he created with the mountain ranges,
Yes. And so when I see this one, when you say that about the mountain ranges, this piece, I actually, remember a time period when my dad he liked to paint mountains. And so when I look at this, it reminds me of a drive. If you drive from Midland, Texas, to El Paso, Texas, there's a long roadway and you see the mountains ahead of you. This is almost the perspective you get of that. So you can almost imagine what it was like in the time when there were no roads and it was all this vast vegetation. And you see that when you drive up to El Paso, you kind of see those mountains in the background, and it reminds me of my home when I see this painting most often.
Right.
From that perspective.
It's awesome. Now across the bottom, it says, it looks like 2015 Bob Snead.
Yes, and that's when it went on a website. So that's when it was
okay.
on a website.
Okay,
Yeah.
right.
So yeah, the original
Okay.
piece was 1981.
Okay. Wow. It's amazing. I love when an artist's work, you can see how they've tried to expand their skills and
Absolutely.
trying different things and, just accomplishing so much
Yeah.
with
So my dad
with-
really began to experiment with just how he painted, bringing texture into. I think there is a piece in there. So if folks will come to the gallery, because we don't actually have that one here, it's called To Mama with Love. And so you can tell it's a woman's hands. They're clasped in front of her, around her knee, and woven in between the hands is a purple heart, symbolizing that she had received that from the military with the loss of her son's life. If you look really closely, there is texture to that painting. My dad liked to use sawdust. So over time, he began to experiment with different materials in his painting. If you look very closely, there is a raised texture in that painting. It is sawdust that he used from that. So I
Interesting.
encourage.
There's another one that has like a raised brick wall.
Yes. Oh,
Yeah,
yes. That's
I
actually one
love.
of my favorite pieces, because I actually remember when he first created that piece, and I
Mhm.
thought that's super cool, Dad, because it hung in
Right.
his El Paso studio for many years, and I liked that, and then the playing around with
Yeah.
the texture.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an unexpected technique.
Right. Yeah. But it's amazing.
So this is called Our Father Who Art in Heaven. This is actually one of the latest pieces. It's probably one of the last 3 or 4 pieces that were actually done for the collection. So that would have been an early 2000 time frame. The story behind this is just given the soldiers' station in life and even in their station in the military during this time, when they were killed in battle, there was no formal ceremony for them. There was no sending their body back home, if you will, to family. So they were often buried right where they died in battle. And so that's what this one is meant to represent. I don't know that they would have had a flag to lay across the casket during that time, but I think that's probably more a sentiment of my dad's hope that there could have been a little bit of more reverence and ceremony. But this is all, representing that the men that they served with became their next of kin. And they were the ones that honored them in death and took that time to do so right where they, were slain in battle. So that's what this represents. What is eerily similar on this, when my father passed away, now getting ready to be 5 years ago in July 2020, my dad is currently buried at Arlington National Cemetery. And due to his achievements, his honors, his commendations when he was in the military, he had a full military honor burial there. And so it was December of 2020 when we buried him. It was a very snowy day in DC that day. My dad's casket was draped with the flag. And they do a part in the ceremony when he's on the caisson where there are 6 horses, but only 5 riders. But you can see that kind of depicted here. It immediately, for all of us there, we all settled on this painting, that my dad would be almost prophetic in painting this painting for how he would be honored in his death and his service to the military. So that one reminds me of that day for my father.
Wow, that is a moving story. That
Yeah.
really is.
Yeah, so because what's really interesting, it did not snow the day before his burial, and it did not snow in the days after. But the day he was, much like it's depicted here, it was snowing.
Right. Wow.
Yeah.
What a special piece this must be for your family.
Yes, and so it was one of the later ones. It actually became quite popular, being one of the last ones put into the collection because he did make a print out of it, and so it was actually one of the more popular prints later for the collection. But I will tell you, the last one that we have here. So it's one of the last, but this one is the very last painting to go in the collection. So this is painting 167. So you can see it's the bookends for the Buffalo Soldier. The reason being, this painting was painted in 2010, and it was commissioned by the state of New Mexico to be displayed permanently in the African American Heritage Center in New Mexico. So that's where the original is. What is really interesting about this painting, one being the last of such a long history, it represents so much. It represents how the Buffalo Soldiers ended their lives for many of them. As they transitioned out of being in the military, they needed new work, if you will. So a lot of former soldiers became cowboys, blacksmiths. Some became marshals and sheriffs in small towns. What we know about modern day rodeoing, a lot of black cowboys bring us a lot of the techniques done in rodeo work today. And so that's what they represent, the end of the full circle, if you will, of a Buffalo Soldier's life. What is noted about this piece is starting in the late 1990s, going into the early 2000s, my dad developed essential tremors in his right hand, making it very difficult for him to keep a steady hand to paint. But then he was asked by the state of New Mexico to paint this painting, and he said yes. And then it was like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? So being that Renaissance man that he is, my dad decided to paint with his left hand. So my dad is right dominant in his hands. So he painted this painting left-handed, completely left-handed. And in doing so, the painting is much smaller. So you will see that in your gallery exhibit of it. It's only about a 9x12 because this is his first attempt at trying to do a full formed painting with his non-dominant hand. And so he did pretty good job with a lot of the detail that you can't necessarily see here, but you'll see it in the painting when you look at it up close. So a few other paintings after he did this one, his wingman from Vietnam asked him for a painting that my dad promised him when they were stationed in Vietnam. It was of a Huey helicopter that they flew. My dad ended up painting that painting for him with his left hand, and finally had it shipped to him before he passed away, of course. So that was, that's the last big accomplishment of my father is, when life gives you lemons, you make lemonade and you adjust.
Exactly. I mean, I was just thinking there was nothing that was ever going to stand in his way.
No.
I mean, from the battles that he would willingly fly into,
right.
To just a personal battle with his body not being what he needed it to be. So
right.
he just figured out another way.
He had to make a way because he wanted to tell a complete story of the Buffalo Soldiers. And because a lot of people would have that question, well, what happened to them after they got out of the military?
Right.
Once, the West was settled and we had fought the Indians and that fight was over, what would they do? And this represents, well, this was their life in retirement, if you will.
I love this because I am about to teach a diversity on the trail lesson today to some high school students. And this was not a part of where the Black Cowboy emerged. It was from when the Texas ranchers went to fight in the Civil War, they left the slaves at home and they learned everything about taking care of cattle and
take care of the land. Somebody has to do it. That's
yes. Right. But I had never heard the part about the Buffalo Soldiers then becoming a part of the cattle drives, but it makes total sense. They spent their life on horseback. They knew the land.
Yes, and protecting those wagon trains. Absolutely.
Yes. Yes. So now I have another level to add to that lesson. So a perfect timing. That's great. So great.
Absolutely.
Karen, I have to tell you that when I mentioned this before, but when I walked through the exhibit, I was emotionally, it is a moving exhibit. I feel like now that you've told me so much about your dad and his work through the years, that part of that is because of how much time and effort and research it became,
Yeah.
this great treasure that he left for us. This amazing legacy he left for you, for his family, for the military, for Black history, for just
And American history too.
American history,
Like, it's
exactly.
all part of our history, and us here being in the West. So here I'm in Texas, you're in Oklahoma. So much of our history goes hand in hand just because of where we are situated in the country. Yeah, so we have some
Exactly.
shared history, and this is just, and that's what my dad, he appreciated it being Black history, but he more so wanted, he liked studying American history. And he said, this is just one chapter in America history that maybe we just don't know all the pages of. And so let's bring them back together. And that's what he chose to do with this collection. Because there were so many pieces in it, one of the things I failed to mention is the 167 pieces, of course, have never shown in its entirety together. Because my dad would paint some pieces, he would show them, people would like them, he would sell them. So, people own them all over the country. But what you have is the core. You have the first in your gallery. I know you have the first 5, that were done. And so my dad's really appreciative. I know he's smiling down that the story is still being told, because he certainly did not want all of this history to die with him.
Right. Well, thank goodness you mentioned that he was able to share all of this information that you shared with us today. He shared it with you and your brother to make sure that the story could continue to be told.
Yes.
And, like you mentioned on the 59th minute painting, these paintings tell a great story without having to be explained in and of themselves. And when they're all together in one room, the story just comes to life.
Right.
And I'm so grateful that you were able to add another dimension to that story for us today, because it's very important that we pass that information on. And by having that here through the month, from now through the end of February, we will have numerous school groups come here, and we will have an opportunity to teach them and show them your dad's works. And it's just all about perpetuating those stories, I believe. And
there's so much they can learn, not only the history, but also my dad's love of art. So one thing that, when I was growing up, I said my dad is an artist and an aviator, because those were the things that he talked about the most in our house. So he loved his art, which would have been his first love, but in the military, he loved flying. And then later in life, in his retirement, he got more into acting. So he didn't just do the story of Flipper, he did community theater. He got my mom into community theater, so they did plays together. And then he had his frame shop, and he did continue to do his cartooning, and then he would speak. Wherever anybody would listen, he'd go around and be a speaker and share that history. So you can teach so much through my dad's life to all of these students about you. And this is one thing he taught us: you don't have to be just one thing in life. You can be multiple things, and you can be multiple things at the same time. So that's one of the greatest things that he tried to share with his grandchildren. That yes, you can be. My son can be a basketball player. But he can also be in the choir too. And so my son has learned that from his papa, if you will. And so that's what I would want your students to come away from. Any student who goes to the exhibit, learn that history, but learn that you can be different parts of yourself at one time.
All right, we're gonna make sure that is a part of our lesson. I have some other teachers in here, and we are all learning this morning. And we are hopefully we continue to learn, and we help encourage those students to always want to, especially learn things that are not in the classroom.
Right.
That's the beauty of having an education program where they can come and see your dad's works and learn so many other things.
Yeah. And just remind them, he was a self-taught self-taught cartoonist at the age of 10. So they can do it.
What a
They can
long
do it.
way. What a long way he
Yeah.
was able to come. Well, Karen, I cannot express to you how much I appreciate you taking time out of your day and
Absolutely.
being my guest on Trail Talk this morning. This has just been this will be one of my very favorite interviews, I can
Oh,
assure
thank
you.
you.
Of
Thank
this,
you.
I'm coming up on 5 years of
Oh,
Trail Talk. And
congratulations.
yes,
Congratulations.
thank you. And this is going to be one of my very favorites. And you know, all these years, we always say, oh, it's time to sign off with happy trails. But today I'm feeling happy trails, Bob
Happy
Snead.
trails.
Happy trails, because what a great, wonderful, giving life he had and continues to
Continues.
have because of the work he left behind for people like me.
Absolutely. It
So,
has been an honor. Thank you so much for having me.
well, thank you, Karen. And we are going to take great pride in showing off your dad's work. Please come to the Chisholm Trail Heritage Center in Duncan, Oklahoma. We're open 7 days a week, and you can come and see this art firsthand because, like Karen said earlier, you need to see it in person. It's pictures do not do it justice. So please come by and see us. And until next time, Karen, it was very nice to meet you. Happy trails.
Happy trails.